time has come to once again answer life's most savory question. Whose cuisine reigns supreme?
It's gonna be unbelievable. You've never seen this before.
This is Iron Chef America.
Iron Chef America is probably my favorite Food Network TV show, especially growing up. I mean, there was a couple that I used to watch. I remember Alton Brown's Kitchen, which was a pretty good show. It was basically a Bill Nye the Science Guy meets regular cooking show, where he would break down certain ingredients and certain pieces of his recipe to a scientific level. And even in some cases, he would show the history of certain dishes and certain ingredients, which was pretty interesting, so it made it stand out from other TV shows. And another show that I remember was Rachel Ray's 30-Minute Meals. There was a lot of shows that came after this that were similar to this, but I feel like she was the first one that really was the archetype where it would show her literally within the span of 30 minutes as the clock ticked down, create a dinner or create a lunch or some type of a meal that was good, nutritious, and delicious within 30 minutes. Unfortunately, I'm not as dedicated or as diligent, so I probably would take 2 hours to make what she made, but it was still a good show. And the only other show I really remember off the top of my head would have to be Drivers, Dive-Ins, and Dives with Mr. Guy Fieri, the man from Flavortown himself. Other than the fact that it was pretty interesting seeing these different restaurants and seeing the different food, it was pretty entertaining to see Guy Fieri go into a kitchen, talk to the chef, put his fingers into the ingredients, touch everything without washing his hands, and lick the utensils while still saying, oh wow, this looks really good. So it was entertaining, it was weird, it was disgusting to a degree, but it was definitely a good show. But out of all these shows, Iron Chef America is still probably number one, just because of the fact that it had a lot of elements that made it entertaining. It had the Iron Chef crew, the Iron Chef America crew, which was basically the home team players. You had people like Chef Bobby Flay, Chef Mario Batali, Chef Morimoto, who basically were part of the Iron Chef Brigade, the Iron Chef team. And what would happen is that an outside player, an outside chef would come in and they'd say, you know what, I want to challenge Chef Bobby Flay, I want to challenge Chef Mario Batali. And they would then go up against each other cooking certain dishes, and it would be judged by a panel of judges. And from this, you would get the idea of would the Iron Chef win or would the contender win? And the show was pretty cool. And it also had an element of incorporating a secret ingredient or a unique ingredient where, you know, you would cook, say, a steak, and as part of this meal, you have to incorporate a certain type of a spice or a certain type of a fruit or a vegetable. And it just kind of threw a monkey wrench in there where it kind of forced the chef to be a little bit more creative and a little bit more open-minded when it came to unique ingredients. And it was a good show. As a matter of fact, it was a great show. I mean, it came from Japan and it actually came to America. So it was literally an international sensation. And fortunately and unfortunately, with good shows and good products, corporations usually have a tendency to do it over and over and over again. And this kind of takes us to the modern day Food Network, where Iron Chef America pretty much ruined the Food Network channel, because you now have a situation where almost every single show that's quote-unquote popular on the channel is a variation of Iron Chef America. I mean, they literally have a baking show, a barbecue show, a random show with random strangers, literally people who you don't know who they are, cooking and competing against each other. And I think one of the most idiotic shows is it's called America's Worst Cooks, where it's literally people who do not even know how to cook. They're not chefs. They're not trained at home. They don't know how to put together a frozen meal from Costco, and they're literally in the kitchen trying to cook 5-star cuisine, and they don't even know how to boil a pot of water. So I don't understand how exactly that's entertaining, but what they did with these shows that was smart is that they basically boiled it down to a formula. Now, as I mentioned, Iron Chef America has a panel of judges. It has chefs competing against each other, and it also has an element of it being timed. There's timed events. You either have 15, 30, maybe an hour to create a certain dish and present it to these judges. Now, they took this and put it to every show you could ever imagine. There's baking shows where they're baking cookies, and it's like, listen, you need to do this in 30 minutes and present it to these random judges. And that's another thing. With Iron Chef America, they kept the judges pretty constant, or they would bring people in who were like authors or food critics, people who had some clout. Whereas with this show, it's like, all right, there's John from Schenectady. He's going to be judging the cookies, so make sure the cookies taste good. And they also did the weird, corny thing that they stole from American Idol, where they needed some guy to be like the rude Simon Cowell guy, where he'll like eat a chocolate chip cookie and go, honestly, I can't believe you've said this is a chocolate chip cookie. It tastes like chocolate shit. This is terrible. I hate it. And it's like, whoa, take it easy. You're so edgy, dude. And it's like, when Gordon Ramsay does that, it's entertaining because he's a legitimate chef with clout. When Simon Cowell did that, it was entertaining because he was one of the first. But then you get this guy who is basically a clone on multiple channels where it's literally playing a caricature and it's playing this role to make the audience be like, oh, wow, this is a good show. And what it's doing is trying to take the core elements of Iron Chef America and thinking that it's simply formulaic and throwing it on these shows. But in reality, it doesn't apply well, and it doesn't come off as well as the original Iron Chef America, because now you have people, like I said, who aren't necessarily chefs, so you don't know who these people are, you've never seen them before, and for me personally, the one thing that really, really bothers me is that they've taken the element of the secret ingredient from Iron Chef America, and they've tried to make it a meme, or they've tried to make it ridiculous, where with Iron Chef America, more times than not, the ingredient made sense. It was some type of a unique food item that you could incorporate in most dishes. Whereas with the new Iron Chef clones, they basically just choose random things that don't add much to it.
And we have leftover pizza.
The pizza is shocking because it's already in its end form. So it's hard to conceptualize what you're going to do with it.
But now it becomes the albatross on you. It becomes the anchor on the show where you have these weird ingredients that you have to incorporate in your meal. And instead of it being something that accentuates the meal or making it better, it just becomes the weird anchor that is forced on you and you have to figure out what to do with it. And sometimes it's foods that don't even make any sense. Like it'll be making a dessert and they're like, yo, here's some hot sauce. Here's some Frank hot sauce. Figure out how to put that into a dessert. Have fun with that one. And the show ends up being weird. It takes elements from Iron Chef America, but does it poorly. They do it with people you never heard of, and it ends up being a weird amalgamation of all these different elements that used to be unique, used to be entertaining, but now it becomes a cheap knockoff that really is not the same as its originator. And unfortunately, there's literally multiple shows that do this, so the Food Network has now degraded itself and degenerated to the point where they just have Iron Chef clones and not much else. I mean, back in the day, if you didn't like Iron Chef America, you could watch those other shows that I mentioned earlier. You could watch Alton Brown and get your Bill Nye fix. You could watch Rachel Ray and fix your life and actually make a dinner at home. You could watch Guy Fieri and say, at least I'm not as crazy as this guy. But now you just turn on the Food Network and every show is a cooking competition show. And at no point am I really learning how to make some scallops at home.
Now, in the words of my uncle,
At the end of every single video, make sure you ask people to rate and subscribe to your content. It makes them feel like they're involved even though they're really not. And most importantly, make sure they comment on every single video. If you have to, disguise it. You know, call it something like the question of the day. And really make them think you're gonna really read it when you really don't have to. Ha ha ha!